It's good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millsy, back with Hometown Commander, back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I brew my version 1.0 deck list of the commander in front of us on my quest to brew the magic world. As always, that deck list is going to be down in the description for you below. As well as I'd really appreciate it if you could interact with the video, like, comment, subscribe, check out the links in the description. Anything you can do to help would be greatly appreciated. But we are slamming through Bloomborough. We're going to do our first of the 3-color commanders from the set. Today we're talking about Helga, Skittish, Seer, a banned mana 1/3 frog druid. It says whenever you cast a creature spell with mana value 4 or greater, you draw a card, gain a life, and put a counter on Helga. And if that wasn't good enough, Helga's ability is to tap to add X mana of any one color, where X is Helga's power, but we can only spend it to cast creature spells with mana value 4 or greater, or creature spells with X in their mana cost. So Helga wants us to play two things: creatures with power 4 or greater, and creatures with X in their creatures cost, which in these colors means Hydras. I think Helga seems like a ton of fun because you get to play all the fun big mana green creatures, you get to play the Hydras, you get to play lots of fun things and mix them together. And to me, this deck kind of reminds me of Magnus Lucia Kane from Warhammer, the Warhammer decks, where you're trying to kind of, ramp up by using that mana every turn to kind of play bigger and bigger things. In that deck, of course, Magnus only taps for 2 mana of any turn when you copy, whereas here, Helga's going to progressively get bigger and bigger. And the cool part about that is we're going to talk about, the big things we want to cast, and we'll talk about the other great mana dorks that can kind of get into camaraderie with Helga to allow us to use more and more mana to cast bigger and bigger things. But it means we can actually grow Helga better by putting counters on it, or untap it and tap it multiple times to get more mana. And that's pretty cool, because then we can potentially start playing bigger and bigger things. And what it seems like with every commander these days, we'll talk about how we can use counters to our advantage. And there's a lot of things in these 3 colors that can give counters to our entire board and make them bigger and bigger as we get into combat. Well, let's start with the big old boys, the big old things we want to cast. To me, there's not a green stompy deck without Galta Primal Hunger. It's probably one of my favorite green creatures of all time. Gets cheaper where X is the total amount of power of creatures you control, getting Galta down to most of the time just 2 green mana on most big boards. And it comes down as a 12/12 with Trample. Galta and Mavrin there on the left feels like a great creature for a deck like this, because it only costs 7 mana for a 12/12. And then when it attacks, you can either get Dinosaur, where X is the greatest power among other attacking creatures you control, or you can get a bunch of 1/1 vampires, where X is the number of attacking creatures you have. Kind of plays double duty there while still being a 12/12 body with Trample. Over on the right, we got the first of these great Hydras we want to talk about in Goldvein Hydra. Goldvein is getting a lot of love in the Hydra world as of late, because it's another one in the line of these Hydras or these X mana spelled creatures that have haste. I think Goldvein Hydra would be more than enough good on its own with just Vigilance and Trample, but coming in with haste makes it really good. It comes in with that classic amount of +1/+1 counters on it, where X is the amount of mana you spent for it, but then when it dies, you get another number of treasures equal to its power, which means you can just pay back the mana you spent into it as long as it dies instead of being exiled. The other green creature I don't think I could live without in a deck that we're playing with creatures power 4 or greater is my one of my favorite commanders of all time, in Goreclaw Terror of Kalsizma. This is a creature spell. This is a creature that reduces other creatures with power 4 or greater by 2 mana. And then it is going to give your creatures that power buff in combat by giving them +1/+1 in Trample. I really like this because then you're handing Trample out to your whole board if they don't have it already. Hydrate Krasis, another great Hydra option. When you cast it, you gain half X life and draw half X cards rounded down, which can be a really great way to refill your hand and get a big creature out. And then it has flying and trample, so not a bad body. Coma is a value engine in itself. There's no reason not to play it. Every turn you get a 3/3 Serpent named Coma's Coil, and then you can sack a Serpent to either tap something down and it can't use its activated abilities this turn, or give itself indestructible. Sure, it can't protect itself from exile removal, but it can protect itself from a lot of other things, and it makes Coma a house to try to deal with. Mistcutter Hydra, another hasty Hydra option. Haste protection from blue, and it enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. Again, another great Hydra for us to use Helga's mana on. Same thing with Primordial Hydra over there on the right. Comes in with X counters on it. Beginning of our upkeep, we double the counters on it, and then it has trample as soon as it gets 10 or more counters on it. A great Hydra option and a scary one added. And then one of my favorite dinosaurs that doesn't see a ton of love in traditional dinosaur decks because it's not in the Naya colors, and that's Nezahal Primal Tide, a 7 mana 7/7 that can't be countered, gives us no maximum hand size, which is great when we're drawing cards with other abilities when creatures come in. When our opponent casts an on-creature spell, we draw a card. And then we can pitch 3 and exile it and return it back to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. A way to basically protect itself by just pitching cards and have it come back. I really like Nezahal, and again, it fits this mana value 4 greater thing we're trying to do. We got the Goose Mother, another fun Hydra. Flying comes in with counters on it, comes in with half the amount of foods, equal to the X, and then whenever you attack, you can sack a food to draw a card. Again, a way just for more card draw, but still be a threat in the air. Thrix Sunstorm is a fun one when we're getting into these primarily Simic colors, but here in Bant, where we have blue, because it reduces all spells we cast with mana value 5 or greater by 1 and cannot be countered, effectively making all of our creatures uncounterable. And this is great with all these Hydras, because we would just declare a value we want for X, Thrix would reduce it by 1, and then that's what we'd have to pay. Overworld Hydra over there on the right's a great one, because when it comes in, you go get any land of your choice and put it on the battlefield tab. That is a great ability, half of that primetime ability, but it comes in as a star, where star is the number of lands we control. So a great one in itself, and way worth the 6 mana. Vaultborn Tyrant there from OTJ feels like another great include. Gives us the draw and gain 3 life whenever a creature with power 4 or greater comes in, or it comes in, which is a great ability, and that card draw can be very great over the course of multiple turns. And then whenever it dies, we can create a token copy of it if it's not already a token. Voracious Hydra in the middle is probably one of my favorite Hydras of all time. When it comes in, you get your choice. You can either double the amount of counters on it or have it fight something. That can be really beneficial depending on what situation you're in. But it never feels bad to put 4 or 5 mana into X and end up being, coming out with 10 counters if that's what you want to do. And then Zopandrel, one of our power and toughness doublers that is mana value 4 or greater, so it's going to help grow Helga as well. And it's always great to have these creatures that have really good abilities also be the kind of things that we want to cast. Getting into the other mana dorks in our deck, the other things we want to use. We don't want to just use Helga. We'll happily use others. Fanatical Ronus just got printed at MH3, and it's probably one of the better mono-green mana dorks that isn't tied to any specific creature type that we've seen in a long time. 2 mana dork that taps for just 1 green, but if we control a creature with power 4 or greater, it taps for 4 green, and we can get it back with Eternalize. Such a great card, and well worth the slot. Gwenna's probably one of my favorites in this category. Tapping for 2 mana in any combination of colors, and we can only use it to cast or activate abilities of creature cards. And then whenever we cast a creature with power 5 or greater, we get to put a counter on it and untap it. It doesn't work as well with the Hydras, but I think it works well with a lot of things in the deck, and so we will happily take it. Inga and Essica feels great here. Creatures have Vigilance and tap to add a mana of any color, but use it only for creature spells. And then whenever we cast a creature spell, if 3 or more mana from creatures was spent to cast it, draw a card. Well, that's very good right for our deck because we're trying to use Helga's mana to cast creatures, meaning we're always going to be drawing extra cards for that privilege. Selvala, another very popular one in this type of archetype. Whenever another creature comes in, if it has the greatest power among the battlefield, its controller may draw a card. And then we can pay a green and tap it to add X mana in any combination of colors where X is the greatest power among creatures we control. So it gets better the bigger our creatures are. And then Troyan feels good here, tapping to add a green and a blue, and spending the mana only to cast spells with mana value 5 or greater, or with X in their mana cost, so fits very well with what Helga's trying to do. Then we can just pay a blue and tap it to draw and discard if we need to. So I like that, some of these mana dorks are giving us multiple options instead of just tapping for mana and kind of working along with what we need. But it's not just about using Helga once. If we can use Helga by untapping it or doing it multiple times, we can actually grow Helga over time and get it, better and better and better and more mana. Kiora Behemoth Beckoner came originally in mind to me as soon as I started putting the deck together, because not only does it just untap Helga with its -1, but it gives us one of these elemental bond style abilities where whenever a creature with power 4 or greater comes in, draw a card. And that's pretty great because Then we're going to be drawing cards every time we cast a big creature or a Hydra with enough counters on it. And then, of course, then we get the upside of being able to untap. I think when you look at Cura that way, you start to see why it's so great for just that 3 mana. Chakram Retriever was a card I had no idea existed until I was doing some searching about untapping creatures, and it came up. Whenever you cast a spell during your turn, untap target creature. Well, that would allow us to untap Helga and use it again and get more mana from it. Cura's Follower can do that ability here, just to untap to tap to untap another target permanent, which is pretty cool. Patriarch Seal is a mana rock that can tap to untap a target legendary creature we control. So hey, that's a way to untap Helga again. And remember, we want to be tapping Helga because the more of those spells we cast, the more of those creatures we cast, the more counters, the bigger she gets. And then Raised by Giants just feels right here. It's a 6-mana enchantment that as long as Helga's out, it's a 10/10 and a giant in addition to its other types. Base power and have is 10/10, which means all those counters on it just give us more and more and more mana. Well, we have counters going on Helga. We might as well pay off getting counters on everything else just because there's so many abilities in these colors that do it. Defiler of Vigor, whenever we cast a green permanent, can put a counter on each creature we control and gives us the option to pay 2 life instead of a green mana for any green permanents we cast. Galadriel, Light of Valinor here can put a +1 counter on each creature we control whenever a creature comes in, or it can add mana or scry 2. Kadam of the Western gives all of our modified creatures trample and then searches for basic lands when our modified creatures deal damage. Sovereign Akaneka How can get us counters on every creature that has its power greater than its base power and put number of counters on it equal to the difference. This is a really fun ability because it's going to grow Helga, right, every time Akanek attacks, but it's going to grow all of our Hydras. It's going to grow so many of our things and make our whole board even better. Broker's Ascendancy puts a counter on each creature we control at each of our end steps. Feldar Retreat gives us the option to either make some tokens and go wide if we want to when lands come in, or put a counter on all of our creatures and give them vigilance. That's a very important ability, especially in a deck where we're very big and we have a good mixture of creatures we really want to attack and block with if possible. Of course, we're playing that new Innkeeper's Talent. I love this card. I think it's going to see it play in a lot of decks going forward. Beginning at combat on our turn, we can put a counter on a creature. Leveling up to level 2 puts all permanents with counters on them having Ward 1, just a way to help protect them. And then if you get up to level 3, you get that doubling season type effect for counters, which isn't bad. I think at minimum for 3 mana, getting it down and leveling up to level 2, you already have a great ability on its own. And just giving that Ward 1 can be really important for a lot of things. It's all permanent, it's not just creatures. So if you're playing with a lot of planeswalkers or enchantments that get counters on them or artifacts that get counters on them, it can really protect your whole board. Simic Ascendancy is another win con for us. If doing the big creatures and the Hydras isn't enough, getting 20 growth counters on Simic Ascendancy won't be very hard and give us an alternate win con. And then Virtual Loyalty, in my opinion, is way better than the Broker's Ascendancy we just talked about, because not only does it give every creature a +1/+1 counter on our end step, it also untaps them, effectively giving them vigilance, meaning we can attack all we want with those creatures and we know they're just going to get untapped so that we can block with them. But I've said it before on this show, and I'll say it again, no deck is ever complete. This is my version 1.0 shot at the deck without any testing, and I think sometimes that leads to maybe needing some adjustments and things as we tried the deck. And these are the 3 cards that almost made the cut but didn't, that I think all deserve to be in here for one reason or another, and I think are worth talking about. The first is 1,000-year Elixir in the middle. This is another copy of that Patriarch Seal type ability. I think it's important because if we notice that tapping Helga multiple times in a turn gets us to progress farther quicker, I think this is an ability we could think about bringing more in of. The only downside to me about the Elixir over the Patriarch Seal is it's not a mana rock, so if Helga goes away and we really don't have anything else we don't want to untap, or the untap shenanigans just aren't as worth it, the Elixir could potentially feel dead on the battlefield. I know that feels like kind of a moot point, but it's important to remember that cards having dual purposes make them really helpful. Monstrous Vortex was a card I really had to convince myself to cut. I think it makes a ton of sense. Whenever you cast a creature spell with power 5 or greater, you discover X, where X is that spell's mana value. The thing that stopped me from putting it in, the thing that inevitably had me take it out, was because the deck has enough Hydras in it that we're going to find that Vortex doesn't always trigger. And I think that's important when we're playing these enchantments, when we're playing these utility enchantments, that 4 mana could be better spent for a Garruk's Uprising or Beastmaster Ascension than it would be for something that doesn't trigger all the time. I think it's just one of those things you have to keep in the back of your mind is, am I playing a card just because it's good on what I think its value is, or because it's always going to be beneficial when I see it in the game? And I think in a deck like this where we're playing Stompy, we're playing big creatures, I'd rather get that card draw and those trample enablers and have them ready to go and have it always be on, rather than Monstrous Vortex only trigger half the time when you look at the creatures that are in the deck. And then 20-Toed Toad on its own feels like it makes sense. Whenever you attack with 2 or more creatures, you put a counter on it and draw a card. Whenever it attacks, you win the game if there are 20 or more counters on it or 20 or more cards in hand. Again, the deck has a lot of easy ways to put counters on things. The difference between 20-Toed Toad and Simic Ascendancy to me is that 20-Toed Toad is a creature, Simic Ascendancy is an enchantment. And it's a lot easier to fill up Simic Ascendancy because it doesn't care about any one creature getting counters, it just cares about any creature getting counters. And enchantments are strictly harder to remove than creatures are these days in our format. So I like the Toad. I think it makes sense to pull it in if you want to do that. I just couldn't find a spot for it in what I wanted. But let's get into our playtests. First off, we're keeping a 3-lander, Garruk's Uprising, Kiora, Fanatic Aronis, Goreclaw. This is probably one of the best hands you can get, to me, as far as what you want to see. You have a Mana Dork, you have something to start reducing things, you have a Trample Enabler that can draw, we have an Untapper. I mean, this is great, right? This is exactly what we want to see. It can push us in the right direction. We'll get that Canopy Vista down turn 1, since this will allow us to put either of these 2 lands and get Fanatic Aronis down turn 2. We get Forgotten Ancient, which gets counters anytime anyone plays a spell, and then our upkeep, we can spread them out. So we can move them right over to Helga if we want to, or we can spread them out around our creatures. That isn't a bad ability to have. Turn 2, we draw a Chord of Calling, which is a great spell. Lets us go get a creature of our choice. I like Chord of Calling for things like Selvala or Gwenna if we really needed a Mana Dork that can do that. Or if we get a little bit higher up on the mana scale, maybe we just go get another creature that we want to see. But here I think we just Fanatic, get it down. I mean, next turn we're putting Helga down anyway. It's kind of a non-bow in that sense. It's not going to do anything special for us next turn. But I don't see any reason why we wouldn't just get it down here and get itself working. Turn 3, we're going to get that Harbor down and play Helga. So now Helga's out and rocking. And now next turn we can start playing, things like Goreclaw and start growing Helga. I think we might actually be able to benefit from should be able to play Goreclaw and Forgotten Ancient next turn with that Fanatic Aronis, which is pretty cool. So turn 4, we're going to get that island down, and then I'm going to go ahead and cast the Goreclaw. So on cast, we're going to go ahead and draw a card, gain a life, and then put a counter on Helga. And so now Helga has 2 power, right? So it can tap for 2 now. I don't know why I keep saying. I guess there's no reason to call it a she. That's just what I keep defaulting to, because of the name. Fanatic Aronis now can tap for 4 green mana. So we're at 6 mana right now, right, for this turn. Forgotten Ancient doesn't cost me less, unfortunately, because Goreclaw cares about power 4 or greater. So I would have to pay the full 4 mana for Forgotten Ancient. But the cool part here is if I use the 4 mana from Fanatic to cast this Forgotten Ancient, Helga still goes again because this is mana power, right? This is mana value 4 or greater. So counter, get that. The Ancient comes in. And then I can tap Helga now for 3 mana. Oh, that's right. Sorry, only creature spells. I keep having to remember that in the back of my head. Only creature spells. So I can't play the Garruk's Uprising with. But that's okay. Now these guys are here, and let's say for the purposes around the table that Forgotten Ancient got at least 3 counters on our turn. We'll move 1 over to Goreclaw, and we'll move 1 over to Helga, just so that way we get more and more mana. We draw a Swords to Plowshares, which is a great little bit of removal. Here I think I'm going to start by paying 3 for Garruk's Uprising. When it comes in, I do control a creature power 4 or greater, so I'm going to draw a card, and then all our creatures have trample, and then anytime we cast a creature with power 4 or greater coming in, or anytime a creature power 4 or greater comes in, we draw a card. We get a counter on the Forgotten Ancient for playing that. So we got 2 mana left, 4 from Helga, 4 from Fanatic Aronis. I wish I had a creature spell here in my hand to use Helga for, but right now I just have 6 mana, right? I'm trying to think what in my deck I want a Court of Calling for, because I could go for 4, 5, 6, and maybe, I could Convoke Forgotten Ancient and Helga for 8 total, so X would be 5, but I don't know that that's really what I want to do at the moment. I'm just trying to think of what I can do here to draw some more cards, get some more things in. We could go look for something that maybe draws us cards on. I'm trying to think if we have anything in our deck that draws cards when we deal damage. This would be a perfect thing for something like Toski, even though it's not power 4. Let's do that. Let's pay the 2, the 4 from Helga. I'm gonna tap or the 4 from Fanatic Awareness. We'll tap Helga and Forgotten Ancient for a Court of Calling for 5. So I'm gonna go see if I can find a creature with mana value 5 or less that I think can help me out here. Inga Nesca might be a good one to draw me cards in the future. I'm just trying to think if there's anything right now. Could draw me some cards, get me some value. Akhenaten How would be great. Selvala would be. Nezahul's not, would be good, but not 5 and under. I was gonna say the Kadama could ramp me this turn by hitting people right with Goreclaw. So Goreclaw is definitely going to get in this turn to hit somebody. That could potentially do that. Galadriel could do it. Galadriel could come in and just scry 2 and draw me a card. So Galadriel is an option. And I think she's the best option, mainly just because then in future turns we can get counters. So let's do that. She's going to come in. We're going to scry 2 and then draw Farseek and Reliquary Tower. Well, I'm going to put both on bottom. I think we've done enough there. And then draw a card. We see Defiler Vigor. Great. So here's a creature we can use on a future turn. Perfect. This is what we were looking for. And then I would just go to combat, slam somebody with Goreclaw, and we'll live to fight another day. Turn 6, we draw for turn. Forgotten Ancient. Let's remove 2 counters. Let's put a counter on Galadriel, put a counter on Helga. Just keep spreading that love around. Answer, she's going to come in tapped. I really would like to get Kiora down before I play the Vigor, just so I can get double draws, but at the same time, if I wait to play the Kiora after I play Defiler of Vigor, I could untap Helga and get a +1/+1 counter because this is a green permanent. So I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tap Helga for 5, and I'm going to play the Defiler of Vigor. So on cast, we don't have anything that's going to happen other than Helga. So Helga's going to draw us a card, gain a life, and get a counter. We draw Herald of Seeker Streams, right? Working very well with our counters, making our things unblockable. Defiler comes in. We have a couple triggers. Draw from the Uprising and the Galadriel trigger. Sorry, we had Cast trigger on Forgotten Ancient. I'll have Galadriel just put a counter on everything. Since we're going to plan to untap Helga here with Cure once we cast it, I think it makes sense to just put a counter on everything. And now Defiler is going to start spreading counters as well, and we get that draw trigger off of Garruk's Uprising. Kozilek's Unsealing is interesting. When we cast a creature with mana value 4, 5, or 6, we get 2 Scions, and then value 7 or greater, we draw 3 cards. So kind of an interesting one. That was 5 mana from Ronus and one of ours, so we'll use 3 more for Kiora. Kiora will immediately tick down to untap Helga, so now Helga can tap for 7 mana if need be. But what I want to do there is that is a permanent, so when we cast a green permanent, we put a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control. So things are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And this may be the turn where, although Defiler came in this turn, this might be a turn where we just slam Herald of Seeker Streams and take a massive attack with these creatures that can no longer be blocked, right? So that's 2 mana left plus the 7 from Helga. Now, I am recalling now that obviously that I can't cast... I can cast Herald of Seeker Streams because it's mana value 4 or greater. So that's what I would do. Tap again, cast the Herald, counter, Draw a card. Don't get my Defiler trigger this time because it's not a green permanent, but it's going to come in. Galadriel will go off. I would have technically had, 3 more blue mana? We will do the Scry 2 and then draw, I guess. I like Up the Beanstalk. We'll take that one and put this Rampant Growth on bottom. And so now these guys cannot be blocked. We would have 3 mana left that we can still use to cast creatures with mana value 4 or greater. But I don't think we don't have anything left as far as that goes. So you at this point you just move to combat. Ronus is tapped. Helga's tapped. These 3 are untapped and able to attack, and now they can't be blocked. So they're just gonna smash into somebody pretty good here. And then on this turn, now our opponents are just in trouble because now our whole board's unblockable. And I think all we're trying to do this turn is just use Defiler's ability to pay our life to make things cheaper, cast as many green permanents as we can, and just, stomp out. I think we can probably knock out at least one player here since Goreclaw grows all of our creatures when they attack, and we just have some fun. Use Helga as much as we can to, cast Coma, cast Beanstalk, cast Troyan. Just try our best to just, play the Unsealing Draw. Just try our best to just load these up as high as we can and get in for damage. I think that's good to stop on the first playtest, so let's head in to the second one. Keeping a 3-lander with that Kozilek's Unsealing, the Retriever, Nature's Lore, and Kodama the West Tree, which, again, goes and gets basic lands whenever creatures with counters on them deal damage to our opponents. Odd one here because we don't have white mana, but we can go get it with the Nature's Lore, so we're not completely out of the woods. It just means that potentially here on turn 2, we need to go ahead and use that Nature's Lore, which can go get us a forest card, but obviously we are playing Spar's Headquarters, as well as we are playing things like Lush Portico. But I'm going to go ahead and get Spar's Headquarters since it's a Triome, right? It'll tap for all of them. But there's our white mana. So now we can cast Helga here on turn 3 and make sure we're heading ourselves up the curve. We'll play that Seaside Citadel and tapped and just get Helga down. Get her working, get her starting. 5 mana here on turn 4. I could go for the Cutter. I could go for the Retriever. The Retriever might make sense for next turn, right? Being able to kind of use Helga to play multiple things. That could be interesting. Let's do that. Let's play the Retriever. Counter here. Draw a card. The Retriever comes in. And so now next turn, when we're casting spells, we can untap Helga. So Helga obviously was tapped, or wasn't tapped there, sorry. We could have hit somebody for 2 if we wanted to, but I don't really see us doing it. I'm just realizing we could have cast more than one spell, couldn't we have? Played that. We hadn't used Helga that turn. So I guess we could have, we didn't have enough mana, that's right, to use her to play anything. That's right. So turn 5 here, 6 mana now. I think about this. Tap for 2. 3, 4, 5, 6. 7. And we'll go Mistcutter for 6. Uncast. We get a counter. Draw a card. Have the Retriever untap Helga. So Mistcutter comes in at 6 counters. And now Helga, we're tapped for 3, plus the last blue that's left for Inganessica. Counter. Draw. Helga untaps. Right? Now Inga's going to start drawing us extra cards when we use the mana. But now Helga's only at 4, and I don't really want to cast Goldvein for 3. I think we're probably better off waiting and using it for a little bit more mana. Hit somebody here with the Hydra. We could hit somebody with Helga if we wanted to, because they have Vigilance, right? And that now next turn, right now with Inganessica, they can all tap for mana as well. We'll move to the next turn. 7 mana here. Helga's tapping for 4 right now, and these all can untap for... They can tap for mana. I might tap the Retriever here, right, for mana if need be. Let's think about this. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I could go 9 into Goldvein Hydra into the X, untap Helga, and 1, 2, 6, 7, 8... 6, 7, and tap this, so we'll 11, 10 into the X. Let's do that and untap. So we'll leave this forest up. tap the Retriever with Inga's tap Helga to cast this for 10. What that'll do is untap Helga with the Retriever. Helga gets a counter, and we draw a card and gain a life. And then the Hydra's going to come in, and then we draw a card with Inga and Eska because we cast a creature and use more than 3 mana from creatures to cast it. Now Helga's tapping for 5, and we have that 1 forest. Yes, so we unfortunately are just 1 mana off Nezahal, but remember we can tap Inga for it. So I think we do that. Tap Helga for 5 green, forest, and Inga and Eska to cast Nezahal. Counter here, untap Helga, draw a card off of Inga and Eska. And now Nezahal comes in. Again, the only downside here is they don't have haste, but I think, Goldvein does, but Nezahal doesn't. But again, now we're just flooding the board. Retriever's untapping Helga. You could see it getting bigger and bigger. We could still tap the Cutter. So we could actually here, no, we'd need double green, and I don't really want to tap. So I think I would just attack 6 here, 10 here, take a shot. And I think on our next turn we would just go discard down. I think I might as well do the Unsealing. Well, no, that's a draw outlet. You would play the Unsealing, play Coma, and start the loop again. Unsealing is going to draw us more cards. And now, we're just probably going to stomp you out. It's going to be very difficult for our opponents at that point unless they have some target removal. So let me know, what do you think of Helga down in the comment section below? I like the deck a ton. If I wasn't already playing something like Magus in Teamer, I think this would be a deck I would give a shot for that Hydras and big creatures thing. I like this deck a ton. I'd love to know what you think of it, and we'll catch you guys next time.